It's still Friday, and it's still Fridays with Pfeiffer. We're going to switch gears a little bit on you. We're going to get into a topic a lot of people probably have some difficulties with, but a lot more people don't have the same difficulties as my next guest and friend and former classmate, Chris O'Leary. Welcome to Fridays with Pfeiffer. How are you?
I'm here. I'm doing okay.
Well, I'm glad you're here, and I'm glad you're doing okay. We were classmates at a time in our lives when we should have been protected, where we should have been treated. I don't want to say with kid gloves, but we should have been treated well, and that wasn't the case all the time.
No, it's there were definitely a lot of my best, most favorite memories were a little more complicated than they seemed. So,
well, we were altar boys together and classmates at Immacolata School, and we were discussing before we went online. I wasn't necessarily there a long time. That's not funny. I started there in 6th grade.
Well, I actually think I owe you an apology, because I think in 6th or 7th grade I probably kicked your butt, because you're the only person I remember fighting. We got into a tussle, and I think I probably won that one.
Well, since you're the guest,
pay-per-view rematch coming up after the show.
If you look at the picture, you can see Peter you had 20 pounds on me and a lot of feisty too.
At that time, and I was one of 6 kids, and I was number 5, so I was definitely accustomed to carrying a load around on my back.
Yeah, you handled yourself well.
Well, thank you. You and I spent a lot of time together with a certain priest, and matter of fact, the guy was called out by the St. Louis Archdiocese in their last go round, and he'd kind of been under the radar for a very long time, and he's a bad dude.
He's a very bad dude. It's near as I can tell, everybody that I've talked to, he got in one form or another. Some with the worst stuff, some just kind of sexual exploitation, sexual abuse, that kind of stuff. For me, it was the worst stuff, sexual assault and rape and that kind of stuff. But near as I can tell from the guys I've talked to, he got everybody, which is why it's kind of crazy that his name hasn't come out and isn't being talked about more. And I'm very frustrated with kind of the local press, and it seems like people don't want to touch the story, and I'm not sure why.
Well, I have a personal connection to you and to the story and to Father Valentine, and they still call him Father. They haven't defrocked the guy. They haven't booted him out of the church. He's still around, and you've been pretty vocal and sounding off and gaining audiences with the Archbishop, and how's that been? Are they receptive to you? Are they listening to you? Do they sound like they care?
The biggest mistake I made was trusting and trying to get help from the Archdiocese of St. Louis. Jesus and all that, despite Jesus and all that stuff. I went to them for help, and all I got was just kind of further and worse psychological abuse. Worse is a tough term, but I got a lot of psychological abuse, gaslighting, false allegations to the police, that kind of stuff. It's really amazing and stunning how arrogant they are. I felt, I'm in the survivor community, and I follow what's going on in Buffalo, and while Buffalo is terrible, St. Louis is worse. The difference is that nobody knows what's going on in St. Louis, and that's why I appreciate your, having the balls to speak up about this stuff and explain your role in it, but also to have me on so we can talk about it.
Well, I remember it was something. I remember you had a picture of you and I, Father Valentine, and another boy.
Yeah. At
the time, and I remember with the kid that's in the numbered sweater.
Yeah.
A time that we were invited up to the rectory by Father Valentine to audition for a passion play. And
I don't have any memory of there being a Passion Play at Immacolata. That was, just a total scam, I guess.
no, I remember I played Pontius Pilate. I remember that. I was able to give the thumbs down. But the picture's all up on the screen right now. As you can see, I'm the plaid shirt guy,
right,
that you fondly referred to me as.
Yeah, not a great picture of you, but
well, I'm glad you blurred my face out. I look like one of those shaken, guys in the back seat in those horror movies. But that is me. I have that same photo minus the blurriness
right.
in a shoebox back at home, buried away with a lot of other things, I guess.
Well, and that's actually one thing that I wanted to talk about with you briefly was. So the most recent allegations that the Archdiocese has made against me is that I've outed people without their permission. So essentially, most recently on March 26th, I met...
Well, how else would you be able to corroborate your story?
Well, so I met with Archbishop Carlson on March 26th. Again, asked him for help, explained what was going on, kind of let him play the, okay, I didn't know about any of this stuff, but now you do card. And I asked him to, basically help me and help the other guys admit it happened, stop lying, stop with the gaslighting. And I gave him 3 months to do that. He wouldn't do that. So then on, this is late June, I put out a Facebook post with a recording of that and a transcript of that. And then I kind of ran it past a few people just to see if they were okay with me talking about that. And I made a point of not referencing any of the survivors that I knew. I did use your name and a couple other names, but these are just, they asked me who the guys in the pictures were, and I answered that question. But I just wanted to make sure that,
No, I'm terribly upset with you. You outed me. No, actually, back in, I think it was 2000, I don't know, when did the story start really breaking in St. Louis?
2002 is when it first
I remember in 2002 hearing some reports about this stuff in the news, in the newspaper, and it was just starting to break. And, I was shocked, and I was moved to action. It took all of my strength to pick up the phone and call the St. Louis County Prosecutor's Office.
Okay, so you called in 2002 too?
I did, and
did they ever call you back?
No, I told them exactly what had happened to me about auditioning for the Passion Play. The rector with Father Valentine, he made us take off our clothes. I mean, our shirts, I should say. Sorry, probably still had our pants on, as I recall. And he was basically, the ruse was that, hey, someone's going to play Christ in the Passion Play. We want to make sure Christ doesn't have any, tattoos or, scars is basically what the ruse was, to get you up there, to get you to take your shirt off. And I remember Father Valentine caressing me from behind when I was topless. And I know that I wasn't the only one that it happened to, but that was something I walked across the street back into the school after the audition was over. That the guy in the numbered shirt in our photograph, we walked across and said, that was really weird. That was out of line. And we looked at each other and said, we're not going to tell anybody about this. This was so bizarre. As children, we didn't know how to process that, but we knew it was not right.
Right.
And that was 2002. I told that story to the prosecutor's office, St. Louis County prosecutor, and I heard nothing back from him.
Did you talk to the Archdiocese?
No.
Okay. Well, so at the same time, 2002, early March 2002, the New York Times stuff ran, then the Post-Dispatch stuff ran. So they said, call into Jennifer Joyce's office. I called in, told them, a number of memories, kind of, stuff like yours.
Sure.
They never called me back. I heard at some point they convened a grand jury, but nobody ever got back to me about that. But then, and this is where the story gets kind of pretty horrible, I called in to the Archdiocese as well, because they put out a number for, kind of a hotline. And I wasn't sure. I didn't really understand what my memories meant. And like I said earlier, a lot of these are my most cherished memories where he made me feel special and different and singled out and special training.
Well, why don't we do that? Why don't we start? I mean, because there's so many different tentacles to the story, to make it a cohesive presentation. Why don't we start off at the early days at Immacolata?
Right. So I'm going to start this with Dolan.
Okay.
Because Dolan came to Immacolata.
Now Cardinal.
Now Timothy Cardinal Dolan. he came to Immacolata in 76, I believe. And you can see I'm sweating just thinking about this stuff.
Well, it's okay. We're friends. I mean, we were
Right.
classmates.
No, I know.
We were there.
I appreciate it. So Dolan came in 76, and actually my first memory of a priest is of Dolan. I had a little confusion between Dolan and Valentine, but it was Dolan. Then Valentine showed up in 77. And I remember, and this is to your point about Valentine still being a priest, my abuse started in face-to-face confession. I don't know whether you went to face-to-face or dark, scary room, but I went to face-to-face confession. And I'm not the only guy who went to face-to-face
No,
confession.
I did both.
Okay.
And the dark, scary room was better because,
Yeah.
my sins were not to see the light of day
Yeah.
when I was 10.
I didn't like the dark, scary room, thus the name. But so my abuse actually started in the face-to-face confession, which I've heard is an excommunicable offense, which is why it's surprising.
Well, he was a creepy guy during those face-to-face. I think I went back to the black box after that.
Okay. I what I remember mostly is hugs and hugs that went on for an awkwardly long period of time. And where was my head exactly? And I didn't feel that weird about it because it was him and he was a priest, and how could priest, this is like the ante room of heaven. How could you how could
You're talking to God. You're confessing your sins to God.
But he was doing stuff to me, and it turns out he also sexually abused another guy who came forward at the same time in March 2002. And this guy, I think he went to Valentine face-to-face confession for his first confession, and Valentine put his hands down his pants. So that's two of us who have told the Archdiocese of St. Louis that Valentine abused us during confession, and that's one of the reasons why it's frustrating that Valentine remains a priest. Plus the fact that they removed him in 13 and never notified me or alerted me or helped me.
Not just you, but everyone.
Well, yeah.
They kept us all in the dark.
Yeah, that's the worst part about it. But so in 77, and then that kind of started a process with the face-to-face confession where I think he was, at least for me, he was testing me, maybe grooming me, that kind of stuff. But then I have other memories of he would have us over for a Risk party. He had me and three other guys, AM, TM, and RB, to play Risk in the rectory. And I have this memory that I believe is related to that night of basically me and Valentine lying on a sofa watching TV. And I think what happened is during that night, he kind of pulled us out one at a time and, again, tested us, probably abused us during that time. But then it also escalated into... So I came forward in April 2018. A guy that night told me a story of Valentine taking him up to his room for haircuts. I have this thing about my hair where I remember Valentine playing with it. I remember him playing with my hair and telling me I was beautiful and that kind of stuff, and that led to some gender confusion stuff and those kinds of things. But and that's where Dolan kind of gets involved because, and I'm interested in your knowledge of Dolan because I remember Dolan being around at a minimum. He knew that Valentine was doing stuff, and he saw at least grooming, if not testing behavior. So I'm actually curious what you know about,
So in 77, you're 9 years old.
Right. Well, I'm 9, just turned 10. So the abuse in the confessional started either when I was 9 or 10, kind of, my birthday's at the end of September. So whenever we made our first confession, I was either 9 or 10. The other guy referenced was 8 at the time. So these are, we're young guys, and that bothers me a little bit when people talk about the whole gay thing. And this is a gay priest problem. Well, 8 years old, 9 years old is not a gay thing. That's a pedophile thing.
Right. And it's a pedophile thing.
Right.
So you're 8 years old, and this stuff gets started.
Right.
And
9 or 10 for me.
All right.
This other guy was 8.
Well, I didn't. We became classmates when I came in 6th grade.
Right.
To Immacolata.
Right.
So I was a little bit older.
Right.
And like I said, being the 5th of 6 kids, I had a little shepherding above me, I guess. But you did not.
Right. Yeah, no, I was the oldest. So, and that's what's frustrating is I've got another message from other people saying, a lot of people knew stuff was going on and they heard stuff from their older brothers and sisters, and I'm like, nobody told me, nobody told my parents, which is frustrating. And I think there are a number of people out there who don't want to talk about this stuff, and I think some of it is survivor guilt, or people not wanting to think too hard about the fact that their parents protected them but didn't protect the other kids, which is frustrating.
Well, yeah, I mean, even I never told my parents anything, even as weird as it was for me to experience what I experienced, which was nothing in comparison to you and other.
This isn't Jaws. It's all bad.
Well, no, I agree. It's all bad, but I'm just saying, it was very, very difficult for me to make that phone call to the prosecutor.
Right. Yeah.
But let's go back to 1977.
Well, and I had kind of the next stage of my process was what I've referred to as special training. I actually filed a lawsuit in October 2015. That was me. And I used the phrase special training because that's how I remember it, and I think that's how Valentine referred to it. It's basically the same story as your story with the passion play, except with me, what he would do is he would have me come. So there was the old people's mass. I think that was at 9 in the middle of the week during the summer. So my parents would go out of town on the 4th of July. Leaving us alone, and then lo and behold, Valentine would call and say, "Hey, I want to come up and give you some. I want you to come up and give you some special training, and it'll just be you and me, and then we can have a Coke afterwards or something." So I came up, served a mass for him, the old people's mass. This would be like midweek before the 4th of July. This is one of the problems I have a problem with the summer, because that's when a lot of this stuff happened. So I served the mass with him alone. Normally there were 2 or 3 servers, but he would set it up so that it would just be me and him, and then he would have me in the back of the sacristy, and he would give me tasks to do that he sold as, I shouldn't be telling you this, but because you're so mature, I can teach you how to do this. Secret prayers and that kind of stuff. And some of the stuff he oversold, I think, to get me so focused on the task that I wouldn't really think or notice what he was doing. And so I would be, filling a container with hosts, and he would be playing with my hair and whispering in my ear and then touching me with his other hand, which creates, problems. And, I'm divorced, and some of it is because
we'll get to that. Again, for our audience
timeline.
Let's see if we can keep a timeline going. And I know you've been talking about it a lot, and I don't know. You tell me. I mean, is it helpful to be talking about it?
No, it is because at a minimum, I don't want what happened to me to happen to anyone else.
So you believe it's still happening?
I think it's possible. I hear, especially in St. Louis, given how arrogant they are, I don't have any confidence in them that they would appropriately handle complaints. And God only knows the circumstances that Valentine is being held under. Are his movements restricted? Are they monitored? Does he have an ankle bracelet? In the real world, we would put him in what's called a prison, but the church, the church has its own prisons, which aren't very prison-y. So, I'm very concerned with the Archdiocese of St. Louis and whether they're taking this seriously, and whether they believe it happened or not. And that's let's make it clear to people that it happened.
Well, and it's hard to be, careful. Right. When you're imbibed in trusting somebody. Right. You've been taught to trust. You've been taught to. You've been told to trust. You've been threatened to trust. Or by God's hand. You'll be struck down if you don't trust. This is God's emissary.
Right. And that was the vibe of Immacolata from what I recall. It was this was the late 70s, fairly liberal times, but Immacolata was very conservative,
still very conservative.
Right. So
not quite fire and brimstone, but not too far removed.
It was hardcore. But then, just kind of following along, kind of what I call the worst day. It may have actually been the same day.
Is this still 77, 78?
Yeah, this would be 70. This could be as late as 80 or so. The picture with you and me in it, And the number shirt guy, that is December 26, 1980.
Really?
Yeah. There's a date written on the back of it. I suspect that that the worst stuff happened. It may have happened multiple times, but I think it happened during the summer of 1980, because I have a memory of getting hot and basically passing out during Mass when I was serving 7th grade Mass. But, the worst stuff involved the special training, plus I ended up with him in the basement of the rectory, and he sold it as, come on over to the rectory and we'll get a Coke, and this is real Coke, not Vess or RC Cola, and I get the whole can rather than having to split it 3 ways with my brothers.
Right.
And then I end up in the basement of the rectory, and I've always had this memory of bailing out of the basement of the rectory. I never really understood what it meant, but it's very obvious that I'm running terrified away from something that's just happened. And it has taken me years and a lot of therapy to be able to kind of roll the tape back from the moment when my hand is on the door to, okay, what was happening before that and what was happening before that. And then I'm sitting in the basement, cowering and listening for him and trying to decide whether to make a break. And then I can roll it back and, he's raping me. So it's no fun, but let's make sure that the buck stops here.
Well, yeah, like I said, I'm not confident it's not happening currently.
Right. No, it's.
And you've not been addressed properly,
right.
by the archdiocese either.
Right.
Now, from 1980, I don't know, because I guess, I don't like talking about my history. I know you don't like talking about yours, but mine might be a little more comical in that by 1980, I wasn't there. Immaculata goes to 8th grade.
Right.
I was kicked out at the end of 7th, so I didn't make it back
I thought you went to Burroughs or something.
Oh, no. No, not I. Back to public school I went. Now it wasn't. It was very nice, but I did not make it.
Why were you kicked out? I didn't catch that.
Well, I Sister Mary Helen kicked me out, but I believe what it was science class, and I lit some Banaka. Remember Banaka?
Oh, I remember
in the
that.
mouth.
Oh my God,
I forget who the
Mr. Nielsen.
Mr. Nielsen. I mean, the guy had Coke bottles for glasses. He set me up. He went out into the hallway and was peering through the crack of the door, and I had the blowtorch in the back of the room, and I was frog marched down to Sister Mary Helen's office. And it's curious. My mother remembers that I was accused of stealing donuts.
Right.
Well, my parents had a bakery right here on Clayton Road.
Yeah, pastries.
A half a mile from where I was supposedly were stealing donuts. But at that age, I don't think I was immune to many misdeeds. But stealing donuts probably was not one of them.
Yeah, that's.
So yes, I was kicked out at the end of 7th.
Right.
But you were there in 8th grade as well.
Right. Yeah, I graduated in '82 and then went on to St. Louis U High. And actually, unfortunately, stuff happened at St. Louis U High too. 8th grade in Immacolata for me was actually pretty good because Dolan was gone, Valentine was gone, and I was king of the world. I was an 8th grader. But then I got into SLU, and then within the first week or so, it became obvious to me that I wasn't safe there because there would be Jesuits who would walk through the locker room. And that's actually, we've talked about that with my classmates, SLU 86 at different reunions, and guys talked about stuff, and I never really thought about it, but I've since come to understand that, at a minimum, I was very scared at SLU freshman year, and it just destroyed my grades and took me forever to recover. And then there was some other stuff senior year. So it was, I thought I had gotten away from it and him, but then SLU happened.
Back to Immaculata. You were abused
Right.
by Father Valentine
Right.
at Immaculata in the rectory, in the basement of the rectory, in his personal residence inside the rectory.
Right.
And that's across the hall at that time from Cardinal Dolan.
Yeah. Yeah. Father Dolan, then Bishop Dolan. He was a bishop as of 2002, and then, got Cardinal, 10 years or so ago. But yeah, Dolan was, it was him and Monsignor Flavin and Valentine. They all lived, they all lived in the rectory at Immacolata, and it's I know Dolan saw at least some of what was going on, and that's frustrating because, well, and that really does end the timeline until 2002 when it picks up again, and Cardinal Dolan calls me back. He returns my call. This is early March 2002. I wasn't the only one who called in. There's another guy who called in related to Valentine, and that proves that Dolan was taking those calls. I've actually had Bishop Rick Sticka, who I've actually heard terrible stories about, tell me that there's no such memo in Valentine's file pertaining to my call-in, and I know that there's no memo pertaining to the other guy, the guy who was abused when he was 8 years old. So it sounds like someone, perhaps Dolan, was playing games with either destroying or scattering those memos. In 2002, early March, Dolan I told him a set of memories and basically asked him, do you think this means anything? Do you believe this stuff that people are saying about Valentine? And he told me flat out, definitively, without any investigation, no.
So after you were abused at Immaculata by Father Valentine, life kind of goes on and,
right.
and builds up over or scabs over or scars over.
Well, and I went to college in Texas, and Texas is completely different, and I really ended up spending 6 years in Texas, and people will tell you I was a completely different person in Texas. I have an ironic nickname that relates to my days in Texas, but it makes the case that I was able to cut loose in Texas, unlike I was able to here in St. Louis. But then I ended up back in St. Louis for grad school at WashU. This would be 92, 94. And then as soon as I came back, I started having problems with depression, but I didn't know what it was related to. But by 2002, I had...
and that's 22 years later.
Right. And even by 2002, I didn't... I had these memories, but again, they were my most cherished memories, and the predominant emotion was feeling special and, elite and select, and, Valentine treated us like we were a big deal. But so my now ex-wife suggested I call in, so I called in.
My now ex-wife suggested I call in 2002 as
really?
well. Yeah.
Oh, really? Yeah. Well, and that's part of the story is it actually wasn't. I don't think it was exactly my idea. It was kind of like, yeah, that's, they just said something general like, if you have any information about Valentine, just call in.
Right.
And so my now ex-wife said, well, didn't you know Valentine? I'm like, oh yeah. So, but I didn't really, I had these memories, but I hadn't had any flashbacks or anything like that. Although I may have been having them and I didn't realize what they were because the worst stuff was kind of chopped out. But then in February 2003, my oldest son made his first confession. I had a panic attack. Then in February 2005, my older daughter made her first confession. I had a panic attack. And I'm like, what in the world is going on? And then I started wondering, okay, maybe this Valentine face-to-face confession stuff means something, but I didn't remember the worst stuff. But I started to get sick in 2005, 2006, psychologically sick, nervous breakdown kind of stuff. I was laid off from Equifax in summer 2007. Ended up the marriage dissolved in 2009, and it really wasn't until 2011 or so that I'd been seeing a psychologist for a year or so talking about marriage stuff, and then we ended up moving on to productivity stuff, and then I started realizing that a lot of my productivity issues were related to sex stuff and gender stuff, and I started having these kind of ritualized behaviors rituals that I had to go through, that as they went on, it became more and more obvious that I was reenacting being raped. So,
well, no, and it's difficult. It's very steeped in psychology,
right?
And how these scars are eventually peeled back because of our perspective we gain as being parents.
Well, and that's exactly the real trigger, and the thing that led me to get sick was that my my boys, especially my kids in general, were going through the same age that I was when I started to get sick.
And you wanted to protect them, but
No,
you didn't know
absolutely.
what from.
Yeah, right. No, and that's exactly that's exactly it. You just have this sense to protect them, but you don't have the memory to know exactly what from.
So these memories are creeping around your life and starting to come forward, and
Right.
it's devastating.
No, it cost me literally everything. So in 2011, I ended up going to the archdiocese through their process, saying, "Are you sure that these memories that I told Dolan in 2002, and I actually told I told someone else, a woman named Nancy Brown, the same stuff, and both of them said no, doesn't mean anything." Dolan immediately said no. Valentine, I knew Valentine forever. I lived with him. He could never do anything that he was accused of. He could never do anything to hurt a child.
So you were dismissed
Right.
by Dolan.
By Dolan, yes. And then Nancy Brown basically said I was misinterpreting this stuff.
And who's Nancy Brown?
She was the assistance coordinator for the Archdiocese of St. Louis.
Oh, she was a psychiatrist, huh? Is that what she was? She was.
Yeah. And Dolan sold her as being an independent person, but she turned out to be working with the Archdiocese.
Sure.
But so in 2011, I come back to him, to a review team, and say, "Are you sure these memories don't mean anything?" Because I was in therapy. I was starting to remember stuff and wonder about stuff. And again, they said, "No, it's all your dad's fault."
Well, isn't that convenient?
Well, and I'm thinking to myself, well, I've got all this kind of crazy sexual touchy stuff, and one of my issues with my dad was that he didn't really touch me or hug me or anything, and that's one of the reasons I went to Valentine, was because Valentine would hug me and touch me and embrace me and that kind of stuff.
Sure.
So I'm quite sure my dad did not touch me down there, because he barely touched me at all.
Right.
He went to the whole thing where he would just shake our hands because he thought that hugging was
Sure,
not appropriate.
it was tough to get those stoic guys to get a hug from
Right.
him.
No, absolutely. So
Our dads.
they did the best they could.
Amen.
But so
And some don't.
right.
And
right.
Father Valentine's one of those guys.
Yeah, and I've heard some. I think Sister Helen has told me some stuff about how narcissistic he was, and I think a lot of the church stuff fed that narcissism, and he just felt entitled.
Well, he got away with it for a
Right.
very, very long time, and you made a direct appeal, and we're told you, no, it was your dad's fault.
Right. So then I tried for another couple of years working through a guy named Deacon Phil Hengen, who's literally one of the worst people I've ever met.
This is like 2011, 12.
Yeah. Up to 13. My nicknames for him are, well, there's Runaround Phil, and then there's also Eichmann. Eichmann tells you how I feel about him exactly. Just very bureaucratic. I'm just doing my job. No compassion at all.
I can't wait to get out of this office. Please move me to Rome.
He's one of the worst people I know. He's actually, as far as I know, he's at WashU. He's working at the Newman Center at WashU, which is pretty horrible. But so I went to him over and over again trying to get help. On a couple of occasions, kind of the most he did is he would say, "Send me a treatment plan," but treatment plans cost money to put together.
Sure.
And I was financing all of this and was having money problems, and I didn't declare bankruptcy, but I was effectively bankrupt.
So you were seeking help
Right.
from
Over
some
and
medical
over.
professions
Right.
and the psychiatric and psychological caregivers.
Right. And I, over and over again, and I went back to the archdiocese.
And they kept telling you to go back to the archdiocese because that's where these memories lie. This is where the
Right.
stuff's coming
right,
from.
Right. And the archdiocese kept saying, "No, it's not.
It's your
us."
dad.
Yeah, it's your dad. And which really crushed me and literally destroyed me when, in May 2013, they permanently removed Valentine due to an allegation that supposedly was made by someone in the summer of 2012. Now, remember, I came forward in May of 2011, so summer 2012 wasn't me. And they never, the Archdiocese in May 2013, when they permanently removed Valentine, made no attempt to contact me, warn me, give me a heads up, much less help me. My psychologist had to do that. I remember getting the call from her, and she's like, "Have you seen the papers? Have you seen the Post and the Riverfront Times? They just permanently removed Valentine." Didn't defrock him. He's still a priest, despite the whole excommunication, confession, supposed thing. But again, they never tried to help me, and that destroyed me for a couple of years. I ended up filing the lawsuit. Well, and actually the worst, that was a really bad time. I discovered I had cancer, malignant melanoma. So in the same time, summer of 2013, the Archdiocese permanently removes Valentine without letting me know. Then in January 2014, as a result of civil litigation, the Archdiocese produced what's known as the Matrix and actually committed perjury in producing the Matrix, because my name wasn't in it and at least one other guy's name wasn't in it. If you didn't call the Archdiocese, you wouldn't have been in it, but I should have been in it and this other guy should have been in it.
Right.
And that's perjury. They're lying to the court.
That wasn't your lawsuit, though.
No, it was a separate lawsuit, but my call in early March 2002, this other guy's call in late March 2002 fell under the time frame. And that's other parts where Dolan and the Archdiocese get involved. When I met with them in 2011, they told me they had no record of my 2002 conversations with Dolan or with Nancy Brown. But because
they didn't happen, right?
Yeah, exactly. This memo, which proves that Dolan was handling those calls in early March 2002, was found in the file of another abuser. So it sounds like maybe they're not trashing stuff, but they're scattering it into other people's files.
Well, they're not sharing information. The Office of Abused Victims is a room full of file cabinets, and nobody goes in there.
Right. No, it's to pull something out and put it in a different file. Right, exactly, to hide it. Because someone's on the trail. Now, theoretically,
there's nobody that's really in charge of necessarily these priests, I guess, right? I mean,
well, theoretically, but they're not doing their job. It's their job is to protect the priests rather than to hold them accountable. Which, to your point about, is this still an issue? Is this something we should be concerned about? It most certainly is. But so they commit perjury. I assume to protect Dolan in 2014. I ended up filing my lawsuit in October 2015, but that was dismissed due to problems with the statute of limitations that were created by Dolan and also by Phil Hangen, Deacon Phil Hangen, Run Around Phil. He just led me on, and while the clock was ticking.
He never said, "Look, you ought to file a lawsuit to protect yourself."
No, he never told me to do. He was never proactive. Love is proactive. Jesus Christ is proactive.
But as a member of the church, his job was to protect the church, and that's what he was doing.
Right. Well, and canon law literally says that and mandates that, at least to a degree. A bishop's job, one of a bishop's job is to prevent scandal.
So one of the rubbing points is actually there's actually law outside of the church.
Right.
And they've kind of dropped the ball a little bit too, haven't they?
Yeah. Well, and that's you're talking about the Missouri Attorney General, and I've actually talked to the Missouri Attorney General's office twice, and this actually gets into politics, and this is a political thing because I was unimpressed with Josh Hawley's pursuit of the matter, and I have talked to under Eric Schmidt. I have talked to an investigator twice, but they're not calling the other people. So I think the Missouri Attorney General and the governor need to do a better job of holding them accountable, because the church will not hold themselves accountable. They're literally canonically unable to hold themselves accountable. But I'm concerned that the press isn't holding them accountable, and the Attorney General, I'm concerned with how good of a job they're doing in terms of holding them accountable. And some of that is because the top guys at the Missouri Attorney General's office are Catholics, and I know a lot of those guys. They were in my former parish at Mary Queen of Peace, and and the Archdiocese has told everybody, the people of St. Louis, that I'm lying. They've made false allegations of terroristic threats to the Shrewsbury Police, to the FBI. Through the Post-Dispatch, they told everybody that I was lying and that my story changed multiple times. Well, if they only talked to me in 2011 and had no record of my 2002 conversation with Dolan, then how can they say my story changed multiple times if they only talked to me once? You have to have multiple data points to know that something changed. And that's the stuff that I asked Carlson about. I'm like, you've said all this stuff. It's obviously a lie. I'm going to assume that you didn't know anything about it. So here's your chance to start doing the right thing. And I gave him that opportunity and gave him 3 months, and he wouldn't do it. So I started releasing the tape, and kind of here we are.
Well, what do you see going forward with your pursuit? Again, from my standpoint, I would like the church to come clean and say, yes, bad has occurred. We're aware of it. We're sorry for it. We ask forgiveness for it. Have they done that?
They've done that. They actually, that was actually one of the really horrible things. They held a massive reparation in September 2018, but they didn't invite any survivors. And I actually stood vigil holding this picture of you and Number Shirt Guy and Father Valentine, and nobody from the archdiocese, none of the priests or bishops would interact with me. This is at the massive reparation. And it turns out the massive reparation isn't oriented at the survivors, it's oriented at God. So they will apologize to God for what they've done, but they won't actually help. And they've made kind of tacit apologies to survivors, but they won't help us. And and they won't retract the lies. As long as they're still lying, that's not an acceptable apology, much less helping survivors for the initial abuse and then all the abuse of the abused.
Well, again, you and I have spoke about it a little bit before. The church, through their experiences, as wrong and as bad as they've been, maybe a positive can come out of it, in that they know, what the results are.
Right.
They have access. There's plenty of money,
Right.
and plenty of experts that they could utilize and help survivors.
Right. And that's what's so frustrating and infuriating about this, is there are resources. I actually went to Catholic Family Services a number of years ago, trying to get psychiatric help to get medication for treatment of stuff, and they wouldn't even help me.
Oh, what was the reasoning?
They wouldn't help me. They didn't have the resources for it.
So there's no wondering why you might be a little upset.
Yes.
I mean, you've been given the stiff arm, and you've been told, no, what happened to you didn't happen to you.
Well, they'll tell people that I'm crazy. This O'Leary guy's crazy. He's lying. He made terroristic threats against us, which I didn't do. So they've tried to paint me as crazy. This is old school smear campaign.
Here he is, as nutty as ever. Chris O'Leary, my former classmate.
And to be honest, you probably won that fight. You probably,
Now he's coming clean. No, we were altar boys together. This was something that was a near miss for me.
No, yeah. And it's funny. I thought it was a near miss, especially because of what Dolan told me in 2002.
Sure.
I started kind of like a memoir-y kind of thing, and my title for it was Lucky, because I thought I was lucky. But by 2011, I had added a question mark to that, because I'm like, I'm not sure I was lucky, because I've got all this stuff going on, and I've got these memories that are coming up, and
So your pursuits are not over.
Right. Now, now it's about ensuring that what happened to me doesn't happen to anyone else.
Well, how can you do that?
Coming on your show, talking to people like you, talking to supportive people like you who can help put the pressure on the archdiocese and make sure that they actually do the right thing. There are other archdioceses out there that have independent reconciliation and compensation programs that actually help survivors. But what I really need is I need the support of lay Catholics, people like that who can put pressure, who have the power of the purse, and who can put pressure on the archdiocese to do the right thing.
So the archdiocese, they don't have any programs that are geared towards helping survivors.
They have them in name, but there's nothing. They're just a facade. They're just a shell. There's no.
It's that office. It's that office next to the other one,
right?
With the file cabinets.
Oh no, yeah, and that's it's just they just give you the runaround. They just run around, and they're just trying to run out the clock. There are theoretical resources there, but when you go to those resources for help, there's nothing there. They will always deny you.
Well, I know you've had trouble with a direct approach,
right?
And you're looking to go over even the archbishop,
right?
And you're dealing with an ancient bureaucracy,
right?
How's that going?
I do have a line to Rome. This is a letter I got from. So there was a conference held in February in the Vatican.
Right.
The Pope put out a thing. I don't even know what it's called anymore. A motu proprio, Vos Estis Lux Mundi. You're the light of the world. That came into effect on June 1st, 2019. It's basically a whole new set of guidelines for handling survivors. Now, I don't know whether those guidelines are retroactive or not, whether they can apply to anything that happened before June 1st, 2019, but I do have multiple episodes of stonewalling done by the Archdiocese of St. Louis that happened after June 1st, 2019. So I've made multiple attempts to get that to Rome through a number of different channels. I recently got a letter on August 1st from Cardinal Sean O'Malley, who's the Archbishop of Boston and on the Papal Commission for the Protection of Minors, has the Pope's ear. So theoretically, my document outlining these violations by the Archdiocese of St. Louis, the stuff that Dolan has done over the years, theoretically that's getting to Rome. I think that's a signature and not a machine signature, but God only knows. But so I'm just trying to get the message and let the Pope know, let the Vatican know that, yeah, you've got all these policies and procedures, but they're not being followed. And I've done the same with the U.S. Council of Catholic Bishops, and that actually ended up with me just getting the police called on me. So I'm not overly, that's where the whole terroristic threats came in, because I just kept blowing the whistle on the Archdiocese.
They were tired of hearing from you.
No, absolutely. They told me, and they told me as much in an email.
Don't call here again.
No, and they literally told me that. I have an email from Sandra Price of the Archdiocese of St. Louis saying exactly that, and I didn't stop, and that's when they alleged the terroristic threats against me.
Because you were harassing them.
Right.
That was the terror?
Right. And that goes to the arrogance, and these are really terrible, horrible people. But I have some hope that maybe the Pope will get involved, but this is going to be a test of the Pope and of VLM, Vos Estis Lux Mundi. So hopefully Cardinal Sean will carry this message to the Vatican, to the Pope, and they'll understand that it's a sham. With at least in terms of the Archdiocese of St. Louis, the response to survivors is a sham.
Well, and it's very difficult to keep, the focus on just you. I mean, your story's your story.
Right.
There are others.
Oh, I think Valentine, based on who I've talked to, and basically nearly everyone I've talked to except for one guy had some story where he got to some degree. Not all like mine, a lot like yours, but so Valentine could have gotten 100 guys at Immacolata, and he was at like 7 or 8 other parishes. So you're talking about hundreds of guys for Valentine alone.
Well, why did he leave Immacolata?
Well, I think that was on a normal rotation, but then he went to Mary Queen of Peace, but was only there for a year. And that's where things get funky, because he was only at Mary Queen of Peace for a year, which starts to sound like a shuffle. So there are all these questions, and I've been doing some talking about this, and people have told me stories coming out of St. Gabe's and all the other places where he was. So there could be hundreds of survivors of Valentine alone, plus there are multiple abusers in St. Louis, so there could be more than 1,000 people in St. Louis, and I've only identified 20 guys or so. So there are hundreds of other survivors out there who have stories to tell, who may need help, who are going through stuff, and we're just being ignored right now. The Archdiocese doesn't want anything to do with us.
So why did the Archdiocese release the 64 names a few weeks ago in the Post-Dispatch and the press releases?
To appease the faithful and make people think that they are doing the right thing. To look like they're doing the right thing. But again, they gave me no heads up to the release of that, to the naming of Valentine. Even though they knew that I've made the worst allegations against Valentine, they still didn't notify me, give me a heads up. I was used to it. They did the same thing in 2013 when they permanently removed him, and that really messed me up for about 2 years or so. So I was kind of used to it, and it didn't completely surprise me. But they want the faithful of St. Louis, the loyalists, to believe that they're doing the right thing, and that's simply not the case. It's a lie. It's a sham.
So going to the Archdiocese and pleading your case and sticking up for yourself in the Catholic community has turned out how?
I'm being shunned by my now former parish Mary Queen of Peace. Literally nobody will talk to me. I am afraid to set foot on there because it got weird for a while when people knew of some of the stuff that was going on. People would throw looks at me, and then it got worse when the Archdiocese started making allegations that I had made terroristic threats against them. That's what really finished it off, because now people think that I'm dangerous and I'm crazy, and then they also told the Post-Dispatch that I'm lying. So, they're running a very comprehensive smear campaign against me, which has isolated me from everyone except for the survivor community and a few people like yourself, which is why, thumbs up on you. I think you are literally doing the Lord's work in trying to hold their feet to the fire.
That's generous.
No, but
I think that the world, ought to see, 10-year-old
right
Chris O'Leary making this stink.
Right.
It's not you.
Right.
It's this kid.
Right.
Who was abused by a priest.
Right. Well, and
why can't they see that? And why isn't there? If there are the hundreds, and that we know that there are the hundreds,
right? We know them,
and not just classmates.
Right.
We know these people exist. How is the church caring for that part of the flock?
They're not. Like I said, the worst thing that I did was going to the Archdiocese of St. Louis for help, because that just led to all the gaslighting and the abuse of the abused, and all the allegations of terroristic threats and lying and cutting me off from my family and from my community and everything. And I'm not the only one out there. I've had other people reach out to me. Every time I talk about this stuff, someone sends me an email.
Oh, sure, you're just out for something. Come on, this nothing bad happened to this kid. You're just a ne'er-do-well looking for a quick buck.
Let's talk about the financial reality of this. So I'm in therapy. That costs $100 an hour. I now do that once a week, was doing it twice a week when I was trying to figure out what in the world was going on.
I'm very cheap, by the way, Chris. Sorry.
Hey, but you're good. You talk a little bit too much for a therapist, but you talk well. There's medication. There's, like I said, I've lost everything. I was fighting cancer at the same time I was fighting the Archdiocese of St. Louis. Still $6,000 in outstanding medical debt for that surgery. Lost wages, rough numbers. This has probably cost my family and me somewhere in the neighborhood of $2 million.
And what are you looking for right now?
I'd like them to stop lying. I'd like them to admit that it happened. If they help my family, that would be awesome. I don't really know what I'm going to...
Wait, you said $2 million. Are you looking for $2 million?
At this point, that's what's been done to me. I don't have any control over that because I've lost the power of lawsuits. Unless the Missouri passes, one of the laws,
just like New York did, right?
No, and I sure hope they do, and contact your legislator about this. I do have worries about my survival, because to your point about this being an 11-year-old kind of doing this stuff, to a degree that's right, because I have not exactly a split personality, but there's a part of me is stuck back then as an 11-year-old, and that affects my ability to make money.
Well, the church might be able to help that 11-year-old boy.
Well, I've been trying for 17 years and they have not helped me. Like I said, the worst thing I did was going to them for help. Theoretically, they could help me. It would be nice if they would help me, but I'm not holding my breath on that.
Well, it's not something people like to talk about. It's not a comfortable subject.
No, but it happened.
Well, what's even more uncomfortable is that it's still happening today.
Right. No,
there are other 11-year-old boys and girls being abused by priests.
Right. And if you're denying that it happened in the past, then why would you take seriously that it's happening in the present?
Well, that's a great question.
And that's a lot of what this is. In order for them to protect the kids of the present, they need to acknowledge what happened to the kids of the past, and they refuse to do that.
Okay, so granting that, what do you tell parents? What could you possibly tell parents? I mean, is there anything that you could help? Parents think they're doing everything great. Hey, I'm going to set my kid up in this school. It's going to be perfect. I trust everybody. Everything's great. Sometimes they're not. Is there anything that you would recommend or suggest or look for?
Well, all right, here's one thing. The Archdiocese does have the Protecting God's Children program, which I think is a good program. Pay attention to that. Take that stuff seriously. And I will give the Archdiocese credit for implementing that. They have done that, and they talk about it, and that's because there is stuff there. There's pushback, which bothers me. A lot of that is BS. This stuff, well, it would be easy if they acknowledged what happened to me what happened to you, what happened to us, then people would take it more seriously because they would realize the immediacy of it. But pay attention to what the Protecting God's Children stuff talks about. And people who won't honor that stuff, won't pay attention to it, those people are a problem, and they really shouldn't be around kids because they're a threat. They're fools at a minimum. But the other thing that people need to understand is you cannot trust the hierarchy. Anyone above a parish priest, and even parish priests now, they are all in the hierarchy, and to your point, nothing really has changed within the hierarchy. You have to go to law enforcement. You have to go to your other parents, go to the teachers, organize among yourself to protect your kids. You cannot trust the church to protect your kids. You have to take responsibility for that yourselves as parents. And I've got family in St. Gabe's, and there was a whole thing there with a priest who had some questions, and I told my cousin, I said, I don't trust this guy. He's got 2 different allegations. You guys as parents need to speak up and prevent this from happening. You have to take seriously your kids' safety. Now the mistake that they made was they didn't allow, or they kept this guy from being placed at St. Gabe's, but the mistake they made was they're like, okay, all right, we're in the clear. We ran off this guy, or we protested enough to keep him from being there. But the predator could already be inside your parish. He could be the maintenance man. He could be the priest. He could be a teacher. You have to understand that this stuff is real. It happened. There's a real threat, and you as parents have to take this seriously, and you have to take ownership of it. And for God's sake, you can't delegate this to the Archdiocese of St. Louis because they will not do that job. They've proven it over and over again. You just read up, Father Sean Radigan in Kansas City. They tried, the people of the parish, the teachers tried to alert the hierarchy to the problems, and the hierarchy just covered it up again. And that's a recent case. That's like 2010, 2012.
Right. To your knowledge, I don't know, every Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, every day there's a mass.
Right.
Every day the basket gets passed around. A collection is asked for.
Right.
To your knowledge, has the Archdiocese ever had a collection for survivors?
No, I know for a fact that they don't. And in fact, this is what they've told the people of the Archdiocese of St. Louis. This isn't as bad as what Boston has told their things, but they're like, at the bottom of the fundraiser for the annual Catholic Appeal, or the Archdiocesan Development Appeal, in the last page,
none of these funds.
Yeah, none of the money raised by the annual Catholic Appeal is used to defend or settle criminal or civil lawsuits related to the clergy abuse scandal. So they're telling the people of St. Louis, no, we don't help survivors. Now Boston is actually worse because they actually explicitly say none of your money is going to go towards therapy or counseling for survivors.
Well, don't you think the flock might want to care for its own?
You would,
if the shepherds aren't caring for the flock, I bet some of the other members of the flock would share their wool.
You would think so, and I'm very confident that people would. They need to understand that the problem exists, and that's why I appreciate you're having me on here. But again, you can't trust the hierarchy. The Archdiocese will not help survivors. They will do some things to protect your kids, but the hierarchy is still hugely problematic. You have to take ownership of the protection of your kids, and the fact is you have to take ownership of caring for survivors. My therapist has actually given me a discount. She's a Catholic woman, very, very nice person who's helping me out. She's told me that she'll do it for free if there are ever money problems. But survivors, we need the help of regular Catholic people, and if regular Catholic people are not cool with this, you have the power of the purse over the Archdiocese, and you can start withholding donations or redirecting donations, cutting out the middleman, to helping survivors, more directly, or just helping other organizations that help survivors.
Do you know, is there an organization that you prefer over another that is helping survivors?
I don't know of any right now. That actually gets into kind of the strange stuff. There's Bishop Barron out of L.A. who's written a book and says the proceeds will go to organizations to help survivors. But I've tweeted at him a number of times, and he's never given me a name of any such organization. So that may all be BS. SNAP has some resources, but they're more about kind of just raising attention and awareness. The Catholic Family Services didn't do it the last I checked. I know there's Lutheran Family Services, Jewish Family Services, but a lot of them are very resource constrained. But, there are survivors who need help out there. And
there are a lot of Catholics in St. Louis,
right,
in the St. Louis Archdiocese. I don't know what the exact number is.
Right.
But I guarantee there are thousands of them that would want to give to support survivors,
right,
and their basic psychiatry, their
right,
basic psychological states would want to heal this wound.
And we need your help. Survivors need your help. This is a major problem.
Well, I recommend you talk to your parish priest.
Yeah.
And you find out how, who, and where.
Yeah.
And start making noise about it. Chris, thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thanks
I appreciate
for
it. Up. It's Fridays with Pfeiffer. Thank you very much. We'll see you next week. That's it. Thanks again, Chris.